Again, Merry Christmas to everyone. We continue to say Merry Christmas throughout the Christmas season and the octave. So both Christmas and Easter are each celebrated within an 8-day period with gusto, and then throughout the season. So that 8 days refers really to the 8th day of creation. So there were 7 days of creation. And on the 8th day, through Jesus, God recreates humanity. This is why you see fonts that are often 8-sided, because it's through that 8th day that we are baptized into Christ. Yesterday evening, friends, Archbishop Bernard Hebda was here at the Basilica and opened the new Jubilee year here at the Basilica, which is also a co-cathedral of the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis. And the Jubilee year dates back to the year 1300. So every 25 years, the Church hosts this season of grace and renewal as we seek to become more holy, more like Christ, more faithful to our discipleship, the Church and all her members. And it was a beautiful celebration last evening. The theme chosen by Pope Francis for this Jubilee year is Pilgrims of Hope. Pilgrims of Hope. The word pilgrim or pilgrimage is very rooted in both the Hebrew Scripture and in Catholic theology, that we are on a journey. The Church is on a journey collectively, and we are on a journey individually in our lives of faith. And it's also rooted in hope. The hope that God will complete the good work that God has begun in all of us and in the Church. That is my hope for all of you. It's my hope for myself and my family as well. Pope Francis said in opening the Jubilee universally last week at the Midnight Mass, he said that the doors of the heart of God is open wide to all. The doors of the heart of God is open to all of us, and that hope does not disappoint, quoting from Romans. Now, we begin this Jubilee year on the Feast of the Holy Family within the octave of Christmas, where we celebrate the incarnate love of God, a love that is extraordinary. There was a conversation between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, who were contemporary and friends, and both known for their incredible writing prowess, and Tolkien particularly for his imagination, the writer of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And one said, C.S. Lewis to Tolkien, "I can understand that God would save us, but what I can't get my mind around is the how, that God became one of us, human." And Tolkien's response was quick. He said, "Don't limit what God can do by your own limited imagination," right? And that's the wonder of the incarnation, God's incarnate love, which is transformative. God desires in freedom and in love to renew us from within our very flesh, our vulnerable flesh, our human flesh. And that's what's extraordinary. We celebrate God with us. Now, when we look at the Holy Family, they can seem very much beyond our ordinary families, right? One was divine, Jesus. 2 were born without original sin. So that's unlike our families. If your family is different, let me know. That would be a miracle. So they seem kind of distant. But if we take a closer look, it reveals that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph experienced the fullness of human experience across the spectrum. And indeed, they are close to us. Mary and Joseph are the only 2 saints who are in every Eucharistic prayer throughout the world when we celebrate a Catholic Mass. It's beautiful. They are interceding on our behalf as patrons of the Universal Catholic Church. And how are they close to us? Well, for those families who have suffered the death of a child and suffered watching children suffer. Mary walking the way of the cross there when Jesus died. For those families who were sent out of their homeland, migrants, fearing death and persecution, they are close. More about that next week on the celebration of Epiphany. For those families, those spouses who lost a loved one long before they did, or lost a loved one. We know that Joseph was on the scene and suddenly he's not. Many historians and scripture scholars opine that he was older than Mary and died much before she did. For those people who struggle with the complexity of God's plan in their life, this is Mary today in the gospel. Why did you do this to us? And Luke is known for the divine imperative. He says on the lips of Jesus, I must be in my Father's house. I am doing his will. And yet Mary ponders these things in her heart, as we hear next week as well on Epiphany. For those families who have lost a child suddenly, not necessarily to death, but suddenly you can't find your child. Think of the great anxiety. Or maybe a child is estranged from a family. In all these ways, the Holy Family is close to us. They are in solidarity with our experience as well. And I'm praying that for my family and for yours and for this parish, which is a family of faith, that the Jubilee year can be a time of renewal, a time of restoration. And the readings also provide wisdom as well today. Sirach, which is part of the wisdom literature, says that we're called to honor our father. The 10 Commandments, right, call us to honor our father and mother. And how are we called to do that? That can be a struggle, and I think of my father had close to a photographic memory for most of his life, and now as he approaches 90 is struggling with his memory, understandably. Well, there's times where his sons, including me, can be less than patient with that. So Dad, if you're watching, I'm sorry I'm airing this at the 9:30 Mass, but it's really a lesson to us. I can remember when my mom was dying of cancer in 2012, one of my regrets, I don't have a ton, but this is one, is that I didn't visit her more often. And then she died quite suddenly at the end. I didn't honor her as fully as I'm called to. Now there are ways that I have honored my parents and my family and siblings as well. But what we hear from Sirach is that those good deeds are counted, right? It's part of what living a faithful discipleship looks like, to honor our mother and our father. Now Colossians is beautiful today. I had a wedding couple ask for a recommendation. I married them the weekend, or I witnessed their marriage the weekend of Thanksgiving, and they said, do you have a second reading selection that you would suggest? And I suggested this reading. It's so beautiful, friends. This is a way that we can mark our families. You have the characteristics of Christian discipleship laid out. It also mirrors the Beatitudes as well, if you look closely. And what Paul is doing to the Colossians is he's saying, remember your baptism. Jesus' act of death and resurrection is salvific, and baptism participates in this, and you wear a garment of Jesus. And the garment looks like all those beautiful characteristics that our lector proclaimed today in that reading. Are we living those? Right? So finally, friends, when we look at this Jubilee year, this is a time of hope. It's rooted in the hope to become more like Jesus, more like God, more faithful, right? More sacrificial, more loving, all of the characteristics that we heard today. So I would invite you to think, as we enter into the offertory, think of those petitions that are rooted in your hopefulness for yourselves and your family for this Jubilee year, and spiritually place those at the offering, at the altar, and ask the Lord to bless those prayers as we seek to become renewed in our faith, the faith of Jesus Christ.